think I'm actually going to start on the handicaps this week.
Hello everyone, welcome to the latest episode of The Jump Show, number 3 in our Ante-Post Cheltenham Festival series, once again alongside Jake Price and Dan Overall. Please do remember to like and subscribe to our video, really just help us out. We'd love to get to 150 likes, so do click that button. Jake and Dan, how are you both? Jake, start with you. Good week?
Yeah, really good. It was actually nice to see some action on the weekend, wasn't it, that we can get stuck into in a minute. So yeah, we got some review points and some Cheltenham clues. What more can we ask for?
We have indeed got some review points and some Cheltenham clues and a Dan Overall sniffle. Sorry to hear a bit under the weather, Dan.
Yeah, I think it may have corresponded with Broadway Boy disappointing. I think we're both sick together. I think that's what I'm going to go with. I feel his pain. We are connected through the ethereal plane, but it seems like we aren't going to have as much to go on next weekend with the way the weather's looking. So yeah, we've got a bit to look back on this weekend, but maybe not so much next week.
Yeah, most of the meetings are being cancelled as we speak, aren't they? Fingers crossed we get some Ascot action at least on Saturday. Let's start off then by looking at last week. Friday saw the Lawlors of Naas Novice Hurdle, the rearranged Grade 1. Good to get it on, at least. And it was a pretty hot novice hurdle on paper beforehand, which was eventually won by Reading Tommy Wrong. I thought it was a really good performance myself. He came in there as the outsider of the party, the most unlikely to win in terms of Willie Mullins' hopefuls going into the race, but actually did it really well under Daryl Jacob, travelled strongly and crept into the race and nailed Ile Atlantique on the line. Form looks pretty strong. Firefox, of course, there's a reason he disappointed in behind. But Lecky Watson was put in his place, and Ile Atlantique, I thought, ran his race. As far as I'm concerned about where Reading Tommy Wrong goes, looking at that race, I think he'd be a prime contender for the Albert Bartlett. He is 8-1 favourite now. Willie's going to have Ballyburn and probably a couple of others for the 2.5 mile of Ballymore, even Ile Atlantique, if they decide to go there instead of the Supreme. So I'd be keen on Reading Tommy Wrong going up in trip myself. I don't think it's the strongest race in the world, looking at the entries at the moment. Dan, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I think your point on where he goes is an interesting one. Obviously, after the race, they indicated he was a stayer. Then afterwards, it seems now more likely to go down the Ballymore route. The thing is, it is properly now Willie Mullins bingo time. I mean, look at the Albert Bartlett market for one. I think he's got the top 7 or so in the betting. And I spent hours this week looking at it, trying to find something I liked at it with that angle in mind. But it's just a nightmare at the minute. You'd say Ballyburn, Ile Atlantique are probably more likely to go to the Ballymore. But then again, if Ballyburn wins the 2 mile race at Dublin Racing Festival really well, does he go to the Supreme? So there's still a lot of questions in that regard. A lot to like about Reading Tommy Wrong. Clearly progressive. I think, as you say, Ile Atlantique is probably the benchmark there. I thought he ran really well. I don't think he's a forlorn hope at all come Cheltenham. I think he's a very likeable individual who'll probably run his race again. Obviously, Firefox, the disappointment, but we have an excuse for that. So yeah, it's an interesting race. I mean, probably haven't seen an absolute nailed-on banker like we sometimes do in the Lawlors of Naas, but an interesting race, a few disappointments, and yeah, I probably wouldn't have Reading Tommy Wrong at the top of my list for Cheltenham, to be honest. I'm still not entirely convinced, but yeah, I think these novice divisions in general remain pretty open.
Yeah, and I think we'll learn plenty, won't we, from the DRF when that comes along in a few weeks' time. Move on then, Jake, to another race from last week, and that was the race that Banbridge won, beating Pic D'Orhy in the Silviniaco Conti chase. It was a good performance, a really nice training performance too from Joseph O'Brien to get him back all guns blazing. Jake, what did you make of that?
Yeah, well, I thought going into the race, it was a proper Grade 2 contest. You know, we often see these Grade 2s. If you look at Silviniaco Conti chase this time last year, it was just an absolute nest of a race. So this year, going into it, we had, Edward Stone. Unfortunately, we lost long till May. That was really sad, but it looked like a really good contest, like a proper contest of up and coming horses taking on Pic D'Orhy, who was the proven of the form lot. And look, I thought Banbridge put in a really good performance. A lot's been said about Pic D'Orhy getting the last wrong, which obviously he did. I would probably argue that Banbridge got the one leaving the back straight wrong as well, though, when he was coming up sides and had to drop back into third and take his time a bit more again. So look, I think it's a really good performance from Banbridge. Obviously, most people were crabbing him, saying that he would need the run, obviously being off the track for so long. So surely there's further improvement to come there. And look, it's going to be all on weather watch now for him, isn't it? If he runs in that Ryanair, then he's going to need it to be good to soft, probably at the worst. Fingers crossed he does get that, because he would make the contest so much more interesting than it would be else. And yeah, I thought Banbridge was very good, and even if he doesn't go there, I'm sure he'll be very, very strong in the market for something like the race at Ascot, but at Aintree, sorry. But yeah, really, really impressed with Banbridge, and he's definitely a Rhino contender.
Yeah, it was a proper horse race as well, wasn't it? Coming to the last, they both had a chance. And of course, for once, Harry Cobden getting the stride wrong. Doesn't do that very often, but he did aboard Pic D'Orhy. And obviously, yeah, condolences to connections of not long till May. That was really sad. Let's move on to Warwick and the Hampton Novices Chase over 3 miles. Dan, I'll come to you. Just wanted to preface this with my thoughts on the race, which was I couldn't believe watching it, how quick they went and why Patrick Wadge on Apple Away and Sam Twister on Broadway Boy took each other on to quite the extent they did. I thought it was a bit of a brainless piece of work from both of those, really, with Gray Dawning and Harry Skelton literally just sitting there thinking, oh, this is right up my street. I'm just going to pounce late. And exactly what he did. The other two didn't have much left. I thought Apple Away ran an absolute blinder, keeping on in second. I thought it was a really good run from her. But in my opinion, Dan, the racing had been done in the early part of the contest for both of those.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel likewise. I'm not necessarily overly sure. I think for the first mile, it was very, very strong pace. I think on Broadway Boy, I think he was flat from the start. I was never happy with him. He didn't look to travel like he normally does. I think that's probably maybe just one hard race too many going into that. Obviously, a lot of difficult races back to back, and he only had about 28 days coming from that Cheltenham handicap. So maybe I think he was just flat all the way. Obviously, the pace was strong for a while, but then I think Sam kind of accepted that a couple of key jumps down the back, Apple Away gained the initiative. He wasn't going to ride him back up to challenge. And I think after that, it wasn't as strong. I mean, I really do like Gray Dawning. I have to say, I was very impressed by the way he did it. I think you can crab the fact that the race may have fallen apart slightly, but I don't think you can deny he seems to be a really rapidly progressive chaser in the making. Still has a tendency to make mistakes, and that's why generally I would be avoiding the likes of Cheltenham with him. I do think he's a horse that prefers a flatter track. I think Aintree would be made for him, and I could see him maybe contesting something like the Charlie Hall and maybe the King George next season. I think he may be slightly underestimated because that race did fall apart, but you still had to be there and capitalise on that situation and also maintain the gallop that the front two were going. So I wouldn't be too harsh to crab him. A horse I like a lot. Wouldn't be on my mind for Cheltenham with the flat track bias, I think, being in mind, but I could see him turning up at Aintree and being a big danger.
Yeah, me too. I can absolutely see that. Of course, he went off, I think, near favouritism, didn't he, for the Sefton last year before coming a cropper. Hopefully, he won't fall this time over fences. Let's move on to Fairyhouse action and Romeo Coolio. So much hype about this horse, wasn't there, Jake, going into the race? I mean, he did win, and now he's going straight to the champion bumper. I wasn't blown away at all. What did you think?
No, I'd agree with that. I think the hype machine has definitely been working overtime here, hasn't it? But look, I appreciate it was his first run for 307 days since it's point to point. It's come after a bit of a setback. They wouldn't want to be starting in January, ideally, with him, would they, if you asked them at the beginning of the season? And Gordon has been in poor form, as you mentioned earlier, with Firefox, obviously at Croke Park. Imagine he's had so many horses this weekend disappoint. So you would start to question a bit of the stable form there as well. But yeah, look, Romeo Coolio got the job done. He's obviously going to have to improve bundles to win the champion bumper, in my opinion. I think there's kind of been a perfect storm in the fact that we've got such a small crop of bumper horses at the minute. There's been such a distinct lack of standout bumper performances across the board. That's kind of highlighted by Maureen, who ran for Willie Mullins yesterday at Punchestown. She's now into like 7 to 1, 8 to 1 in the market just because of one good performance in a bumper. That's the kind of the state that we're in right now. Hopefully the ZRF, as we said for a few races now, is going to clear up some of these pictures. But his 420k price tag has surely played a part in his price for Cheltenham. And at the minute, I would say Jalan Duda is got a way better chance of winning than he does.
Yeah, he's the one that's really stuck out for me actually so far, Jalan Duda. I love the way he just keeps finding under pressure too. Final horse we're going to talk about, final race too, is the Moscow Flyer. It's got a really good roll of honour, this one, Dan. Some really fine winners of this in the past. Mystical Power looks pretty smart himself. Didn't really do much right in the race until the final furlong, which he drew clear pretty impressively. How taken were you by that?
I think he failed to be impressed by the way he finished the race. And I think he was ridden with a degree of confidence. I know, obviously, his jumping isn't great. It was a bit sticky early on, but I think the fact that Mark Walsh was almost content to let the front three almost form a line of three in front of him on the turn for home and almost just bide his time. He was squeezing him along, but it wasn't going for everything. He was almost just waiting for that gap to appear. To me, it would indicate he thought he had a decent horse underneath him. And as soon as that gap emerged, he put the race to bed very, very quickly. I think we finally now have a supreme favourite that's probably worthy of being there. Based on that performance, I do think Jagoro is a horse with a future. Obviously, he's got form that ties in with Butcher Hollow, who also ties in with Jade DeGrugy, who's one of the favourites for the Mayor's Novice Hurdle. I think he's a solid benchmark horse. You can make arguments about Lombron and James's Gate may be disappointing, but I think you can draw a solid line through Jagoro, and that would indicate this is a very impressive performance. Again, he wouldn't be a supreme favourite who looks bomb-proof by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, if you jump like that in a quickly run supreme, you get behind early, it's going to be tough to make up that ground. But I was visually very impressed by that, and I would definitely have him as favourite over Jericho de Repene, that's for sure.
Yeah, like Dan, I was quite impressed by the performance of Mystical Power. But, especially visually, I think he put in a really nice performance there. But the problem I kind of have with it is I think that if you ask Willie at the start of the season or October, November, who his best novice hurdler was for the Supreme, I think he would absolutely laugh at you if you said it was this guy, wouldn't he? I think it's kind of been a series of events that have worked out to him running in this race and then winning this race. And I just worry that it could be a really weak Moscow Flyer, like when we had Getterbird win it in 2018. That would be my one concern. I think that our best clue that we're going to get for the Supreme, especially with Ballyburn and stuff involved as well, is going to be that 2 mile novice at the DRF. I think that is going to be the final destination, but also the strongest clue to the Supreme, and hopefully we'll find the winner in that race. But yeah, I did like Mystical Power. I definitely agree that he should be shorter than Jericho de Repene based on what they've achieved so far. It's just that slight worry of, is it actually a good race or not?
Yeah, JP has got a lot of nice 2 mile novices at the moment, hasn't he? That's for sure. Dan, might stick with you here. Last part of the review section, going to highlight or nominate a horse or two from the last 7 days that might have gone under the radar a little bit. What are yours?
Yeah, a couple of interesting ones. Diamond Rye would be the first one who won a novice hurdle up at Warwick. Obviously, had won a bumper previous season. It was touted as a bit of a dark horse coming into this season as maybe a contender for some of those Grade 1 novice hurdles. I don't think he'll be a Cheltenham horse this year, which maybe mentioning on this show is a bit contradictory. But I think in general, I think it's worth pointing out that I think Joe Tizard has a couple of decent novices in him and Lord of Thunder, who I'm very keen on with a view to the short to medium term. I saw Diamond Rye got a mark 135 today. I think that's harsh. That's probably going to force their hand in terms of he's probably going to have to go for graded races or maybe run under a penalty in a regular novice hurdle beforehand. But he'll be a serious chaser, I think, next season. I'd definitely keep him on side. Lord of Thunder is on a mark 129. I think he's still very well handicapped. Keep an eye on him wherever he goes. He's got a bit more experience and they've thought a lot of him. And then the second one was Caliph de Burle, who I mean, I rarely pipe up in the chat or on Twitter about horses who win races and I think, oh, wow, we've seen a good one there. Like someone will do it every 5 seconds for a horse who wins a maiden hurdle by a nose. It takes a bit more to impress me and get me quite excited. And this one really did. Like, I loved everything about this. He just looked the ultimate professional for a young horse, traveled really well, very simple, won the race easy, could be really, really top class. And after the race, I saw quotes of 25-1 for the Triumph Hurdle immediately after, and I thought, that's tempting. He's not the typical profile because he's Paul Nicholls, got some more longer-term prospect. 25s, I think that takes into that risk factor a bit, and I'd be willing to have a bit of a chance on that. But by the time I looked at it, he'd already gone into 12s. And then immediately after that, they said he's not going to go for the Triumph. So that kind of tells you sometimes waiting is best and don't overreact immediately when you're looking at these Paul Nicholls juveniles. But they mentioned him as a potential Gold Cup horse down the line. He's clearly held in some regard. I'd keep him on side massively. He'll probably go to the Adonis next time, take a lot of beating there. But again, he's one for 2 to 3 years down the line before we really see the best of him. But I think he's top class.
Yeah, they really like him, don't they? Looks a proper chaser in the making. I completely agree with you too on Diamond Rye. I was at Exeter when he made his hurdles debut, finished behind one of Nichols's. And Joe Tizard was so nervous before the race. They really like this horse. And I was really pleased, actually, the way he did it at Warwick, because he clearly learnt a lot. He travelled so strongly through the race. And I thought it was just kind of greenness in the closing stages. He still looks a work in progress, but he's got a proper engine, isn't he?
Yeah, no, massively. I think he's also anecdotal of how I think Joe Tizard takes a more patient approach than maybe Colin did. I think he'll be kind of minded with a view to being a bit of a medium to long-term prospect. But yeah, he's one to be excited about. Got a lot of ability, but as you say, Tom, he's still clearly learning. So I wouldn't be in a rush to chuck him in something like a Ballymore, because I think that'd just become too soon for him.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm going to put up one from last week myself. That was Pepe Lamoko, who won at Kempton. I was really taken with this horse. I don't think it was the strongest contest in the world, but he hit the line really strongly. He's clearly improving at a rate of knots. He's been put up to a mark of 128. I think they might bypass Cheltenham, go for something before Aintree in the lead up between now and then to try and get his handicap mark up to the kind of mid 130s, and then possibly target a handicap chase at Aintree. I think he'd have no problem staying further, and I can see him being a proper force later in the season in some of the bigger handicap chases. I think he's a really improver, and I like the way he jumps. So we'll see what happens with Pepe Lamoko. Right, now for the moment you've all been waiting for. It's our third Ante-Post selection each leading up to the Cheltenham Festival. Ante-Post, of course. Jake, let's start with you this week. Who are you going with?
Yeah, but I think I'm actually going to start on the handicaps this week. Obviously, we've had a fair few goes at the graded races. Some of them are pretty muddy pitches still, and some of them you just can't get involved in at this stage due to the timing. So I'm going to go for the Ultima. And it's going to be a horse who ran this weekend, actually, which is why the timing works out. And the horse is Chianti Classico, which obviously Dan mentioned on the show last week. Now, he ran at Kempton in a 3-mile handicap chase where he was off top weight, off a mark of 142. And I think it was definitely a performance where, as Dan mentioned last week, if he got beat, I wasn't going to be too worried about it as long as he ran well. Because Kim Bailey has been in pretty awful form. I think he's 0 from 18 at the time of recordings. So, there's definitely a cloud going over his yard at the minute. As we mentioned with Gordon Elliott, there's probably a bigger one over Kim Bailey's at the minute. So that was a slight concern going into the race. He was still sent off a pretty short price to win it. But I saw quite a lot of people complaining about how wide he had to travel the whole way around. Harry Cobden really did give him an exaggerated wide ride around Kempton. And, that's never going to help your chances of winning a race around there. It's a fairly sharp enough track. The winner, Phlegmatic, obviously went around the inside the whole way and was given the perfect winning ride. So I was actually really impressed with him, though, because I thought that his jumping was spectacular. He absolutely wings every fence. He gets them right perfectly every single time. And he really did actually stay on to the line as well. He came quite wide, but his jumping was bringing him back into the race. And in the end, he was only beaten a couple of lengths into second. So I thought that was absolutely perfect. He's been put up £1 to a mark of 143 for it as well. So it's not as if you can complain in terms of a handicap wise. And obviously this was his third run. So this now qualifies him for the Ultima. So they can probably go fresh with him now. Obviously, if you remember, he ran at Ascot back in November, and then they didn't want to run him again until January. So I'd imagine the plan would now be to leave him until the Ultima and have him nice and fresh for the day. Because that's what they seem to think that he likes best. So there's plenty of positives there. But if I go back to Chepstow when he made his debut, I really did think that he just is a perfect chaser. He's really upwardly mobile, really aggressive in his jumps. As I said, he's pinpoint accurate. And it was a pretty testing debut where it was sleeting rain at Chepstow. Obviously, the next day it ended up being like heavy ground, didn't it? So the ground was getting wet. Obviously, Chepstow's a nice undulating track, which is similar to similar to Cheltenham in that regard. And he handled that perfectly and won easily. Before then, obviously going off to Ascot and giving away £19 to two rivals in a bit of a funnily run race, which I wouldn't worry about too much with him at all. So he's got the experience, but he's still obviously very, very progressive and unexposed. A mark of 143, I think, very much underestimates him. And Kim Bailey's actually had his last two Cheltenham Festival winners in handicap chases as well. Imperial Aura obviously won the novice handicap chase off the same mark of 143 a couple of years ago. And then Dana won the 2015 plate as well. So he's got experience in this. He's even got experience in running horses in the Ultima. Vindication off a mark of 159 came fourth in 2020, which obviously was a really good run considering he was off such a high weight. And then obviously notably Happy Go Lucky off a mark of 147 was second in 2021 when he was running as a novice as well. And he also came into the race following a break. So I think there's a bit of previous there. I think Kim Bailey knows what he's doing. They tried it in 2022 as well with Does He Know as a novice, but he was rated 152 in the end because he won the Grade 2 Reynoldstown at Ascot beforehand. I think they won't make that mistake this time. I'm sure that Chianti will go there, fresh for the race. And the drift out to 20-1 for that Campton defeat, I think, is a bit of an overreaction. I think that's a good price. I think that it's worth getting on now. And yeah, I think there's plenty more to come from him when we get to the spring festivals.
Yeah, I couldn't really agree more. I think, as you mentioned it, Jake, I mentioned it last week. I had the Changing Man and Chianti Classico on my mind for the Ultima going into last weekend, just kind of having a view to how they both performed. Obviously, the Changing Man's been dropped 4 pounds, you let me know, to 128. Obviously, he went well for long enough and then just faded tamely, so he's kind of out the radar now. But everything about Chianti Classico's run there screamed Ultima to me. So in a rare special edition, I think this is a double selection. Obviously, I'm not going to repeat the case because I don't need to repeat what's already been mentioned, but a big fan of Chianti Classico. 20-1 is a massive overreaction. He's got the profile that just looks tailor-made for an Ultima. He's the type who should go off a lot shorter should he run. So yeah, absolutely all on board with that. Chianti Classico is the Jump Show double selection for the Ultima, a rare treat.
And I'll just touch on Trelawney quickly as well, because he was another one that people were saying for Kim Bailey for the Ultima. But if you went back and watched his run of a Toten, how the hell he can go left-handed in such a massive field handicap chase at Cheltenham and get around, let alone win it, is going to be absolutely beyond me. So yeah, Chianti Classico is clearly the pick between the two for me.
Yeah, that was some effort from Trelawney, wasn't it? I've never seen anything like it, at least in recent weeks. Extraordinary performance. Dan, what's your Ante-Post selection number 3 then for this week?
So I spent a lot of time looking at races like the Albert Bartlett, and I had a couple in mind, but a few things put me off. Mainly, one was meant to run on Thursday, but it's probably not going to run. And in general, I found it a very tough market. So I ended up reverting to my stereotypical of handicap nature. It's one I've had to get priced up myself. It's probably the most competitive handicap chase, or probably one of the more difficult ones to gain an angle into at this stage. So have I completely lost the plot? Probably, but it's desperate times, but I think I can make a reasonable enough case for him, and that's Safarur for the Gordon Elliott team in the plate. Currently 20-1 without non-runner no bet, or 16-1 non-runner no bet. I think given it's only 4 points and given the uncertainty, I think the non-runner no bet angle is what I prefer in this instance. Obviously, Gordon Elliott and Festival Handicaps is just a bit of a natural fit. His record in the plate in the last few years, he tends to have one in here at a reasonable short price. They tend to run pretty well. As a Storyteller, won it in 2018 as a novice. He went off 5-1. Didn't have any runners in 2019, but then in 2020, he had 2 runners, both shorter than 10-1. Ben Dundee finished 5th as a novice. Then in 2021, Far Class was 5-1 second. Grand Paradis went off 11-2 as a novice. So, in general, he has a novice in here that goes off a short price, which I think he's probably the more natural profile for this race than any others. Obviously, progressive novice hurdle last season. He won the Michael Purcell, beating Buddy One. That form reads pretty well now. That race tends to produce a bit of a stayer over 2.5 miles rather than a 2 miler. So I think that's worth bearing in mind. And he's one of the gambles of the week last year, if you remember, in the Coral Cup. He was probably touted for the pipe more than that, but they had so many handicap hurdlers they had to split them up. He was 16-1 on generally when the market's open, and he went off 13-2 favourite for a Coral Cup, which is some gamble in a race like that. It doesn't happen very often. I think you can completely forgive the fact he pulled up because he was in the worst position possible, given the ground was chewed up to hell on the inside. He was held up, had no room at basically every bend. It was just an impossible position he was put in. You can put a line through that. And I think what he's shown so far as a novice chaser, I've been very encouraged by. All his runs have been over 2 miles or 2 mile one. He was going well behind Facile Vega and in the pocket on his chase debut when falling 3 out. He would have finished 3rd on that occasion. He jumped well in the main, but St. Felicien was the leader on that occasion. And he ran down the fence markedly to his left. And it just looked like Safarur copied him, because he did exactly the same thing and took a bit of a novice fall. But until St. Felicien did that, he jumped pretty straight and really well. Splains Tower was back in 4th that day for all that fat. Splains Tower was not exactly off much on that occasion, but it was a hot race and it was one of the better novice chases you've probably seen this season. He was then lucky. He got a bit of luck next time out when beating Hunter Jean, who fell at the last, wouldn't have beaten him, but they pulled miles clear of the rest. And again, that was a sharp enough test for him. I think he's clearly a horse who wants further. And then he was second to Calixios at Naas last time out in a decent race again. All of his form ties in with probably the just below top tier of those 2 mile novice chases, obviously without Marine Nationale. I think it's all very, very solid form. He stuck to his task really well, I thought, at Naas last time out, stayed on strongly up the hill, jumped well. Obviously, Calixios jumped really well out in front, had the run of the race, and couldn't quite get to him, but a lot to like about that performance. Again, he just looks a very reliable conveyance over a fence. So those are his 3 starts over fences secured already. He's entered in 2 races at the DRF. He's entered in the Irish Arkle and what used to be the Flogas over 2 mile 5. I think he could go to either, to be honest. Both are complete possibilities. I'm maybe leaning towards the Flowgas because they have found a 50 who's a live chance in the Irish Arkle, you'd say, whereas the Flowgas, their best probably chances like Favre de Champdou or a horse like that. They don't really have a clear contender for that. I don't think he's a clear contender for it either, but I think you can see a world in which he stays on into a decent third in either race, to be honest, and that would be an ideal kind of prep for it. The Storyteller was actually 7th in the Flowgas before winning the plate, so it's been a path to success in the past. He's clearly crying out for a bit further. I mean, he's half brother to 2 is over 3 miles. One of his half brothers actually King's Odyssey, who was third in a plate a few years ago for Evan Williams and ran in the plate on a few occasions. Obviously, all of his best hurdles form comes over 2.5 miles as well. And novices with form in graded novice hurdles and novice chases have a great record on the plate. He's a bit of an old school winner in the fact he's a novice. The last 2 years have been kind of trend busters from a certain perspective. But go back a few years, he looks to have the ideal profile for that race. Based on what he's achieved so far other fences, I have his marks somewhere in the low to mid 140s. Again, that's basically bang on where you want to be. He's trained by the right person. He's still unexposed over 2.5 miles and further. He looks to be crying out for it. And if he gets there, like so many of Gordon Elliott previous novices in the race have been, I can see him going off close to the head of the market.
You make a sound case as always, Dan, I have to say. I'm going to go elsewhere, but actually it's funny because you've mentioned the horse that I'm picking out this week, and that's Hunter's Yarn for the Arkle. Now, you should never be afraid of one horse. That's always been my motto. And in one horse, you've got Marine Nationale, of course, who is the favourite and the odds-on favourite at the moment for the Arkle. He'll take a power of beating. We'll see him in the Irish Arkle, see what he can do there against some slightly tougher opposition he's likely to face. However, I don't think, if you look down at the markets, it's a particularly strong renewal apart from the favourites. I think a lot of these horses are going to be going elsewhere. You've got Facile Vega, who needs a trip now. We know that. Gaelic Warrior, I can't have him at Cheltenham going left-handed. I think he runs quite a few pounds below his best. At least the 2 times we've seen him there, he's proved that to me so far. Found a 50. I think he's going to be short of tactical speed. I don't think he's fast enough for a strong 2-mile race like this one. That's my personal opinion. I think he is a little bit better if you're up him in trip. Ilete Tom, not good enough. And then you come to Hunter's Yarn and Spillans Tower. Spillans Tower needs further, in my view. And Hunter's Yarn has got bags of pace, bags of speed. I've been very impressed with him in 2 starts so far. Obviously beating Dan's selection there, Safi Road, he would have done had he not fallen. But he was 5 lengths clear at the time, having jumped pretty well in the main. And likewise, when he won last time, he jumped pretty well in the main again, made a very bad mistake, 2 out, I think it was. But I think in general terms, he's a pretty swift maneuverer over the larger obstacles, and he's obviously only had 2 starts. There's plenty of time for him to brush up his jumping. Simon Munir, Isaac Swade, Willie Mullins have won the race twice in recent years with Footpaddon, and of course last year with El Fabiolo. They know what it takes to win. He's a 7-year-old. He's on the up, and if you look back at his hurdles form last year, in the early part of the season, it was pretty exciting, really. He won a Navan Novice hurdle really easily, and then he went and beat Imagine by 5 lengths. Of course, has improved this season over fences. Didn't really go right for him in the Canty Hurdle at the Cheltenham Festival, for which he went off a pretty short price. He was near the top of the market for that. But nothing really went right from there. The trainer was asked afterwards why he didn't run his race, and he could offer no explanation. It might just have been at that early stage of his career, the hustle and bustle of a really big field like that at Cheltenham might have just not been up his street. But only one run that's bad at Cheltenham so far. I wouldn't read too much into that. Obviously, if he goes there again this season and is really below par, you can then start to make a case, well, he doesn't like it there. But after one run, I wouldn't be too rushing to think that too much about Hunter's Yarn. But I love the way he travels really strongly. I think a stronger pace is really going to help him. He can sit off it. He's got that really high cruising speed that I think will suit in an Arkle. And if there are, say, 6-7 runners and one of them gets a nice lead, he can just tow himself into it. And I think he's going to have a strong chance going to Cheltenham. He's not entered in the Irish Arkle, so it remains to be seen if they try and get another run into him. I doubt it, to be honest. I think he'll probably go straight there for Willie Mullins. And as I say, looking at the market at the moment, there aren't many above him who I'd have either in the race or having particularly strong chance. So he's the one for me to take on Marine Nationale, who I think obviously is a very strong favourite. Won the Supreme last year, but at 16-1, Hunter's Yarn, nice each-way price. And I can see him going off second favourite in the end, if indeed he becomes Willie Mullins' #1 hope for the race, which is entirely possible. And at the moment, I think it's probably quite likely. So Hunter's Yarn for me in the Arc will be my choice. I like what he's done so far. I just think he needs to brush up his jumping ever so slightly. But he's got that... he's capable definitely of a clear hand. So fingers crossed he produces one at Cheltenham. But that would be my pick in this week's, I should say, Ante-Post selection. Cheers, guys. A lot of fun as usual. Hopefully 3 winners there on the table for us. Dan, I'm always interested in what you've got to say. What do you think about what I've just said? Are you a fan of Hunter's Yarn?
You're praying I don't massacre you again like last week. No, I agree. It's one of the more. It's an each way race for sure to have a little play, and obviously Marine National you can't really touch him, and it looks like Facile Vega's going up in trip, so it's definitely one of those. And I guess the dilemma is with a lot of people, it's like Calixios, is it Hunter's Yarn, is it Ilete Tant? But yeah, I think Hunter's Yarn's probably got more natural ability than what we've necessarily seen so far. He is still probably a bit learning on the job, but can definitely see him running into a place in an Arkle, and he may well end up being Willie's number one should things fall a certain way. So yeah, can definitely see him running into a place. It will just be a tough task to beat Marine National.
Yeah, it certainly will. And Jake, just before we go, I did want to say that I completely agree with Chianti Classico, because I think he looks a proper Ultima type who really would enjoy the kind of argy-bargy hustle and bustle of a big field like that. I know he's not had as many starts as some of the more seasoned handicappers, but I think he'll really enjoy that test.
Yeah, I think the only box he doesn't tick is having run over fences at Cheltenham beforehand. That's the only one that, is quite a big trend in the Ultima. But as I said, the way that he handled Chepstow, I think he'll be absolutely fine. The way he jumped, I think he'd be in any situation and get out of it well. So yeah, I like him a lot. And on Hunter's Yarn, I've been quite taken by his performances over fences as well. So I can definitely see your reason for putting him up, and I can definitely see him running well. But hopefully he doesn't make a mistake. That'll be the thing you're hoping for.
Yeah, he's been prone
that sharp bend on the run to 2 out. You can just see it happening, can't you? Yeah. It's just where did he make his error at the last race? Bully 2 out. Oh, okay, yeah. Cool. Yeah, we can. I can see it happening now. It's going to be your Marlin mission. It's gonna haunt you.
Yeah, that is a nasty fence, isn't it? Even for the best of jumpers, and Hunter's Yarn certainly isn't that so far. Fingers crossed, as I say. Push it up. Cheers, guys. Thanks for that. Good fun as always, and hopefully some winners in there once again. Please do remember to like and subscribe to our channel. It massively helps us out. And comment with your best Ante-Post fantasy for the Cheltenham Festival. As always, we'd love to hear what you think, and indeed what you think about our 3 selections for this week. Until next time here on The Jump Show, it's goodbye from us.